In 1789, a mob of starving Parisians stormed the Bastille, igniting one of history's bloodiest revolutions. Textbooks credit bread shortages, Enlightenment philosophy, and class resentment for the upheaval, but they almost always omit the true bitter catalyst: salt. Specifically, the Gabelle, a crushing, arbitrary tax on salt that had been bleeding the French poor dry for over 400 years. Wars have been waged over it. Entire economies have been built on it. The Roman Empire famously paid its soldiers with it. The word salary literally derives from the Latin word for salt, and at one point in medieval Africa, salt was traded ounce for ounce with gold. But today, you can buy a massive container of it for about $1 at any grocery store, and most people never think twice about it. So, how did this simple white mineral go from being the most valuable substance on Earth to something we casually toss on French fries? To understand salt, you have to start with biology. The human body contains about 250 grams of sodium chloride at any given time, roughly enough to fill a small shaker. Your muscles need it to contract, your nerves need it to fire electrical signals, and your cells need it to maintain the correct balance of water. Without salt, your body shuts down, your blood pressure drops, your brain swells, and your organs fail. This isn't a slow process. Severe sodium depletion can kill a human in days. Early humans figured this out long before they understood chemistry. They watched animals, deer, elephants, and mountain goats would travel enormous distances, sometimes hundreds of miles, to reach natural salt deposits. These were called salt licks, where sodium chloride seeped to the surface. African elephants have been observed walking through pitch-dark cave systems, feeling their way along the walls with their trunks, just to reach these underground deposits, scraping the mineral off the rock walls with their tusks. Humans watched this behavior and followed the trails. Prehistoric hunters tracked these animal paths to salt licks and eventually started harvesting the resource for themselves. In Romania, archaeologists found salt springs being exploited as far back as 6000 BCE, making organized salt production significantly older than the Egyptian pyramids. In China's Yuncheng Salt Lake region, evidence suggests humans were collecting salt from evaporated lake beds as far back as 8,000 years ago. These weren't casual activities. Communities settled permanently around these sources, and early trade networks were organized specifically to move salt from areas of abundance to regions of scarcity. But collecting salt from a spring is one thing. Turning it into a transportable commodity required technology, organization, and eventually, state control. This is where salt began to reshape civilization. The ancient Egyptians used a naturally occurring compound called natron, mostly sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, to dry out the bodies of their dead. This was the foundation of mummification, a process taking 70 days, where workers packed body cavities with natron to absorb all moisture, preserving the corpse for thousands of years. Without salt, there are no mummies, and without mummies, the entire Egyptian afterlife religion would look completely different. Beyond ritual, salt kept fish and meat edible for months or years. In a world without refrigeration, this was not a luxury. It was the difference between surviving a winter and starving to death. Egyptian fishermen packed their catch in salt and stored them in clay jars to transport them along the Nile. Later, the Romans perfected garum, a fermented fish sauce made by layering fish and salt in stone vats and letting them break down in the sun. It was essentially the ketchup of the ancient Mediterranean, and it was only possible because of salt. In China, the technological leaps were even more advanced. By 3000 BCE, communities in the Sichuan province were drilling for salt brine. They sank bamboo pipes over 300 feet deep to pump up the salty water and boiled it in iron pans. While drilling, they accidentally discovered natural gas, which they piped through bamboo tubes to fuel their evaporation pans. In a very real sense, ancient Chinese salt production led to one of the earliest known uses of natural gas as an energy source. By the Han Dynasty, the imperial government established a state monopoly. Private production was banned, and the penalty for illegal trade was death. This revenue funded the military and infrastructure, allowing the government to extract wealth without directly taxing farmers. For 2 millennia, this salt tax remained the backbone of Chinese state income. Meanwhile, the Romans built the Via Salaria, or Salt Road, specifically to transport sea salt from the Adriatic coast to Rome. Roman soldiers were often paid in salt or given a specific allowance to buy it, the salarium. Every time you receive a paycheck today, you are participating in a linguistic tradition stretching back over 2,000 years to a Roman soldier buying salt. The history of salt is also a history of immense human suffering. Across the Sahara, starting around the 8th century, camel caravans carried slabs of rock salt from mines in Tagaza, a place so remote that even houses were constructed from blocks of salt. The miners were mostly enslaved people, working in temperatures exceeding 120 degrees with no fresh water. The Arab traveler Ibn Battuta visited Tagaza in the 1300s and described it as one of the most miserable places on earth. Yet these caravans traveled for months toward the markets of Timbuktu, where salt was exchanged for gold, ounce for ounce. These trade routes built empires. The Mali Empire owed much of its wealth to the salt gold trade. Mansa Musa, Mali's emperor, was so rich that during his 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca, he spent so much gold in Cairo that he crashed the Egyptian gold market for over a decade. Salt was the foundation of that wealth. In Europe, Venice leveraged its salt trade to become a maritime superpower. By the 1200s, Venice held a near monopoly, stockpiling salt and selling it at massive markups. In 1307, they even fought the War of Chioggia against Genoa, largely over salt control. Salt funded the Venetian navy, and the navy protected the salt routes, a self-reinforcing cycle that built the city's stunning architecture. Further north, Salzburg, the Salt Fortress, grew rich from Bronze Age alpine mines, with salt money funding the Baroque palaces we visit today. But this wealth fueled revolt. When the Spanish rulers of Naples tried to impose a new salt tax in 1597, the citizens erupted in violence. The French Gabelle was even more notorious, creating a thriving black market and an army of salt police, the Gabellos, who arrested 3,000 people annually. It was one of the most hated institutions in France, and when the revolutionaries listed their grievances, the salt tax was near the top. In the American Civil War, salt was a strategic nightmare for the Confederacy. Blockaded from northern industry, the South faced a desperate salt shortage by 1862. The price of salt skyrocketed from $2 a bag to $60, as families could no longer afford to preserve their meat. The Union Army strategically destroyed Confederate salt works, including the facility at Saltville, Virginia, and raids along the Gulf Coast. Many historians argue that this salt shortage contributed as much to Confederate defeat as any battlefield loss, proving that wars are won by logistics, not just cannons. The most iconic moment in modern salt history occurred in 1930 in India. For decades, the British colonial government maintained a monopoly, prohibiting Indians from collecting salt even when it washed up on their own shores. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi began his 240-mile march to the sea. Upon arriving, he reached down and picked up a lump of natural salt. This simple act of defiance shattered the moral authority of the British Empire. Then, the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Mechanical mining and vacuum evaporation made salt abundant and cheap. The discovery of vast underground deposits in Poland, the United States, and across the globe ensured supply would never again dictate the fate of nations. Today, the world produces roughly 300 million tons annually, with table salt costing pennies. The mineral didn't stop mattering, it became ubiquitous. But the gap between what salt once was and what it is now reminds us that power is built on foundations that can shift overnight. Just as salt's value evaporated with technology, other resources we deem essential today may one day follow the same path. So, the next time you reach for that shaker, take a second to look at what you're holding. You are looking at a substance that built civilizations and destroyed them. That was worth its weight in gold, and later worth almost nothing. That marched armies across continents, and marched Gandhi to the sea. All of human history is compressed into a tiny white crystal that dissolves on your tongue.